For the first 40 years of my life, I was deeply embedded in the world of Jehovah's Witnesses. I was born in, it was all I knew. We lived with an intense focus on Armageddon, always preparing, always waiting for Jehovah to step in and fix everything wrong with the world. But here's something that really started to bother me about that. When you look at Jesus, the way he lived was all about action. He wasn't just talking about the kingdom of God. He was out there feeding the hungry, healing the sick, really connecting with people in their suffering. But on the other hand, we as witnesses were taught to keep to ourselves, focus on preaching, and avoid getting involved in any community work or charity. They called it staying neutral. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt off. I mean, how can you claim to follow Jesus and walk by on the other side of the road when someone's in need? And I don't mean to be harsh on individual witnesses here. I mean, many of them, just like me, they were following what they were taught. They're trapped in a system that dictates every part of their lives under the guise of their religious devotion. It's not the sincerity of the individuals that I'm questioning. It's the teachings that limit their ability to make a tangible difference in the world right now, not just in some distant prophesied future. Now, I'm not asking you if you're currently a witness to abandon your faith. It's not about that. It's about bringing your actions into alignment with the compassionate and active spirit of Jesus' teachings, not waiting for change, but being the change, just like he was. When you're a Jehovah's Witness, the central mantra that you live by is wait on Jehovah. And this isn't just a passive stance. It's a whole lifestyle. It's rooted deeply in the belief that all solutions to human suffering lie in the future establishment of God's kingdom. And this perspective shapes every aspect of your life as a witness, especially how you view things like charity and community service. The Watchtower teaches people that the most important and often the only way that they should help others is through their ministry, preaching the good news of the kingdom. They view the spiritual work as the ultimate form of charity, believing that offering spiritual salvation is more vital than addressing immediate physical needs. Matthew 24:14, that's what they cite all the time. And that's where Jesus says that the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations. And then the end will come. And based on that, witnesses argue that their mission is not to fix the world's problems through direct action, but to announce the forthcoming divine solution. But here's where the contradiction pierces right through that teaching. The Gospels are overflowing with instances of Jesus not just preaching about the kingdom, but also actively engaging in works of healing, feeding, comforting the distressed. In the Gospel of Matthew, for example, Jesus heals the sick, feeds thousands with just a few loaves and fishes, and he comforts the mourning. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Matthew 11:5. Those actions speak louder than words. They're tangible manifestations of Jesus' teachings. Now, witnesses are taught to prioritize the spiritual over the physical assistance, focusing on what they believe will be an eternal paradise on earth, while often ignoring the suffering that surrounds them right now. They argue from the scriptures, places like John 18:36, where Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world," to justify their stance on neutrality and non-involvement in social issues. But isn't it striking how Jesus, whose kingdom was not of this world, still spent so much time serving the people within it and helping them? Now, this isn't to question the sincerity or the devotion of individual witnesses. They're often earnest and committed believers. I certainly was. Many are my family, my former friends, people that I loved and respected very deeply. But there's a profound disconnect between the all-encompassing ministry of Jesus and the narrower interpretation offered by the Watchtower. It's a selective reading of the gospel. It focuses more on a future promise while overlooking current afflictions, and that is a huge deviation from the example that Jesus set. So if you're a witness, I say to you, don't look just at the scriptures that the Watchtower quotes. Look at the full narrative of Jesus' life and teachings in the gospel. Consider whether true faithfulness to Christ might require us to extend our hands not just in preaching, but in immediate, compassionate action. If we engage more fully with the world suffering now, you could actually be living more faithfully to the footsteps of Jesus, because that's what he did. Shouldn't you start considering that waiting on Jehovah should also mean actively embodying Christ's love and mercy today? If you read the gospel, that's what you'll find. For example, when we look at the life that Jesus is shown to have lived in the Gospels, you find a figure who embodies active compassion and intervention, not just spiritual guidance. Jesus, very much grounded in the tangible needs of the people around him, offers a real contrast to the more passive approach that's encouraged by the Watchtower. Here's a few examples. First of all, Gospel of Mark, Jesus heals a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. He didn't just offer her words of comfort. He stopped, listened, restored her health, and acknowledged her faith in front of the crowd. That's Mark 5. Go read it. It wasn't just about the physical healing, but about restoring her dignity and her place within the community. John 9. Jesus heals a man born blind, using the moment not just to change the man's life, but also to teach a lesson about working the works of God while it is day. Jesus directly ties the necessity of divine work to the immediate needs of people. He doesn't postpone it to some future date, some day of Jehovah. And one of the most powerful lessons that we studied all the time, it's the parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke chapter 10. Jesus challenges the very notion of what it means to serve and who qualifies as a neighbor. The priest and the Levite, despite their status, fail to act. The Samaritan, a figure who's disdained among Jesus' audience, becomes the hero for his immediate response to human suffering. All those examples, they pose a fundamental question. If Jesus is so consistently engaged with the world's suffering directly and immediately, why would his followers choose to step back, focus only on spiritual salvation? It's not about undermining the hope of a future resolution under God's kingdom. It's about reconciling that hope with the immediate call to action that you see evident in Jesus' ministry. Again, if you're a witness, reflecting on these discrepancies, it's not about doubting your faith. It's about enriching it, really, by aligning more completely, more closely to the example that Jesus set. He didn't just limit his ministry to words, to some future hope, but he demonstrated through actions that serving others physically and emotionally is inseparable from our spiritual life. So ask yourself, is your current practice fully reflecting the depth and breadth of what Jesus did? Are you focusing too narrowly on one aspect of his ministry at the expense of all the others? You should think about that question. It's not a departure from your faith. It's a journey towards a fuller understanding of what it means to live and be like Jesus, engaged, active, responsive to human needs right here, right now. And if we look at the theological framework, you could call it, of Jehovah's Witnesses as taught by the Watchtower, you find that the primary form of service to God is just through preaching about his kingdom. I mean, it's undeniably that's a significant aspect of Christian duty. But when you look closer at the broader Christian tradition in the scriptures, a more complex picture is what you see, one that integrates both spiritual proclamation and active, tangible service. Think about the early Christian community. As described in Acts, the believers didn't just devote themselves to the apostles' teaching, but also to fellowship, to sharing meals, to prayers. It's in the 2nd chapter of Acts. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone in need. They ensured that no one among them was lacking at all. This wasn't just communal living. It was an expression of faith through practical earthly actions. Letter of James. There's an unequivocal statement about the nature of faith and deeds. What good is it, he says, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Faith by itself, if it's not accompanied by action, is dead. New World Translation, faith without works is dead. James is telling Christians to understand that their faith must be visible in actions that reflect God's love and mercy. He didn't say, pray for the future kingdom so that they will be fed and taken care of. In fact, he says, if you tell your brother to be warm and well fed, what good is that? That's not love. If the early Christians, if Jesus' own apostles and disciples did not see a contradiction between their hope for God's kingdom and their responsibility to alleviate suffering here and now, why should modern day witnesses see such efforts as secondary or even unnecessary, which is mostly what they say? Well, like I said, Jesus' own ministry was deeply entrenched in acts of service. He helped people with their immediate needs. Matthew 25, Jesus identifies himself with the needy. For I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Service to others isn't just encouraged in that passage. Jesus equates service to those people with service to him. But the Watchtower argues that the most effective way to help people is spiritual means, primarily through preaching, because physical fixes are temporary and only the kingdom can provide lasting solutions. But that perspective is a false dichotomy. The biblical witness does not require choosing between the spiritual and the physical. It calls for aid in both. And neglecting immediate needs in the name of spiritual priorities, that runs counter to the scriptural mandate to love and serve the least of these. I mean, think about it. If someone's hungry, if someone's sick, if someone's poor, how much attention can they focus to the spiritual message you're trying to give them? It's not going to help them to tell them, oh, God's kingdom is coming to solve all your problems. Yay, I might be dead by then. I mean, it's been 140 years already. That's not going to help them now. Even if you 1000% believe God's kingdom is coming, Jehovah's Day is coming, these things will be solved. That does not absolve you of the action you need to take right now to help people. If you read the gospel, that's what Jesus did. If you want to be a Christian, if you want to be Christ-like, that's what you will do. If you feel any kind of tension between what you were taught and what the scriptures say, well, think about those discrepancies and reflect on the fact that what you were taught is different from what Jesus did. Now, that doesn't mean you have to completely abandon your faith, but at least pursue a deeper, more integrated understanding of what it means to be a Christian, what Christian service is all about. You need to recognize that your response to human suffering cannot be postponed till some nebulous future, but needs to be addressed right now. That's what Jesus did. That's what you should do. It's not theological speculation. It's a call to live out your faith fully and faithfully right now. The reality of human suffering doesn't just stop while you anticipate some divine intervention coming in the future. It's persistent, pervasive, and it demands your attention and action right now. For Jehovah's Witnesses, the promise of a future paradise under God's kingdom, it offers a profound hope, but it also raises critical questions about your responsibilities in the present. The urgency of suffering is evident. Millions of people struggle with poverty, there's disease, there's injustice. Every day, these things impact people's real lives. It causes undeniable pain and hardship. Now, if you're a follower of Christ, how are you supposed to respond to those needs? How did he respond to those needs in the people he preached to? Are you just going to overlook all those problems, waiting for some heavenly solution? Or are you going to do what Jesus did? Is your faith going to compel you to act? Will your compassion compel you to act in the way he did? In Luke, Jesus says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free." Luke chapter 4, go look it up. That mission statement from Jesus, it's not just spiritual. It's also very practical. It addresses literal afflictions and injustices in his time, and by extension, your time, if you call yourself a Christian. Think about how quickly Jesus responded to people suffering. When a leper approached him for healing, Jesus didn't tell him to wait for the kingdom. He reached out and healed him on the spot. That action underscores a critical aspect of Jesus' ministry, alleviating suffering. It's not about some future promise. It's a present imperative. But the Watchtower doesn't teach that. It emphasizes a future solution of all the problems of the world brought about by God's kingdom, and that makes witnesses passive in addressing current problems. But that viewpoint diminishes the scope of Christian duty as depicted in the Gospels. The parable of the sheep and the goats, let me go back to that. It highlights that Christ expects us to act on behalf of the suffering now, not later. He identifies himself with someone in need, saying, whatever you did for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. It's not just a matter of charity. It's justice. It's righteousness. Qualities that Jehovah's Witnesses say they hold in high regard. The prophets of the Hebrew Scriptures spoke vehemently about the need to act justly and to love mercy. They used to quote that all the time, Micah 6:8. These aren't optional extras. They are central to the faith of someone who calls himself a Christian. Human suffering is urgent. It requires more than future promises. It demands action now. It's really an invitation for you to extend your ministry beyond just preaching and actively participating in efforts to help alleviate other people's problems, advocate for justice, provide to the needy, all the things that Jesus did. It doesn't diminish your faith in God's kingdom. It embodies the principles that it represents. If you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses and you're watching this and you can feel what I'm saying, I just want you to stop and think about what you can do to be a part of this solution. Engaging in practical acts of kindness and justice doesn't mean losing faith in God's future promises. It means living out your faith now, concretely, compassionately, imitating Jesus in the way you do it. Jesus was a model of active compassion, intervention, not just spiritual proclamation. He did that too, but his ministry wasn't just confined to words of future hope. It was marked by immediate action, addressing the very real needs of the people around him. If you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, I challenge you to read the gospel and expand your understanding and what it means to be in service. We used to say we're going in service when we would preach, but if you really want to go in service, you should also actively help people, the poor, the hungry, the sick. You should be alleviating suffering because that was the service Jesus did in addition to preaching. Help people with their physical needs first, and I promise you they'll be way more inclined to listen to you. When you read the gospel, pay attention. Jesus almost always heals people, feeds people, takes care of their physical needs first, and then he preaches to them. Why do you think he does that? Because they can't pay attention if they're in pain, if they're sick, if they're hungry. Read it. Don't read the little snatches and quotes that the Watchtower references. Read the whole thing and see how different the picture of Jesus is than what you do as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. They are not the same. They were certainly not the same for me. I was 40 years in that religion. I know how it is. They don't encourage any kind of charity. The Watchtower has no charitable arm, not even for people in the Kingdom Hall, in your own congregation. They just rely on witnesses to show love or whatever to individuals. But the Watchtower, the organization, doesn't organize charitable work. Again, go back to Acts chapter 2. The first century Christian congregation organized charity for all of the other Christians so that no one was lacking. Does Watchtower do that? No, they do not. Are they Christian? You answer that question for yourself. If they're not imitating Jesus and they're not imitating the apostles and disciples and what they did in the first century, can you call yourself a Christian? I will leave that question and that thought to you. Only you can answer that. The bottom line, faith and works are non-opposites. They're complementary. Scriptures vividly demonstrate that practical charity can and should coexist with spiritual goals. Engaging in real, tangible acts of kindness and justice, that doesn't undermine your faith. That enriches it. It authenticates it. That's what it does. It proves that it's real and true. When you look around the world and you look at the suffering in it, it should become clear that waiting passively for divine intervention is not enough, especially when you read the gospel outside of the lens of the Watchtower. You are called to be an active participant in alleviating suffering right now, embodying the principles of the kingdom that you go and preach to people about. By expanding the ways that you serve, you can more fully reflect the compassion and the spirit of Jesus' teachings. Don't just wait for change, be the change. Follow the compassionate path laid out by Jesus Christ himself in the gospel. If you're currently a witness, that is what the gospel says you should do. Read it. Don't read the Watchtower and what it says about it. Just read it and see what he did. And that should tell you everything you need to know. Well, that is what I think, but I would love to know what you think. So be sure to leave a comment below. Don't forget to like this video if you did, in fact, like it, to share it with others you think it might be helpful for. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to get more videos like this. If you want to support what I'm trying to accomplish here, you can click the join button below. If you don't see a join button, you can become a channel member by clicking the link in the video description. Thank you guys. I love you. And as always, thanks for watching.